What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett. In today's episode, I'm going to be going over the newcomers to the Big Ten: Oregon, USC, Washington, and UCLA. The order that I just listed them in is how I expect them to finish this year, but for those of you who are traditional Big Ten fans and are maybe hoping to be introduced to who these teams are, who their main players are and everything, this is the video for you. I'm going to be going over each of these teams, kind of my expectations for them for the year, and what I expect their adjustment to the Big Ten to look like. But before I get into it, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. So starting things out, a team that's kind of projected to finish in the middle bottom half of the Big Ten is UCLA. The Bruins last year were 8-5, 4-5 in the Pac-12. Gone is head coach Chip Kelly, now the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. Those two teams do not match up this season. So barring a very surprising UCLA run, they won't face off this year. Incoming head coach is Deshaun Foster, who, if you watch Big Ten Media Days, had a little bit of an awkward introduction, but the merit of being a head coach isn't decided by how you do an introductory press conferences. They also bring in offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy, which I think is a huge addition. This is a guy who really should be, I think, a head coach at the NFL level, and instead, for whatever reason, he's now an offensive coordinator at the college level. Maybe he's one of those guys who's better suited as a coordinator. There are plenty of guys like that. I think Chip Kelly is actually one of those guys as well, who does better as an offensive coordinator than a head coach, although he did do a great job at Oregon and even had UCLA moving in the right direction. The Bruins also lose quarterback Dante Moore. He transferred to Oregon. He'll be expected to be behind Dylan Gabriel. A little more on the Ducks later in this video, though. Their offense was fairly middle of the road. Their best area last year was the run game. They ranked 16th nationally, and they were 32nd in total offense. Quarterback Ethan Garbers is the starter, and it will be the starter most likely at UCLA this year. Running back TJ Harden kind of leads that rushing attack, and he is going to be the guy that the Bruins lean on to continue to depend on the ground game. Wide receiver J. Michael Sturtevant and then tight end Moliki Mataveo are the two main receiving threats for the Bruins. And the top newcomer is going to be a guy who's likely going to slot in at left tackle, Ruben Unije, coming in from Houston. He's expected to fill a role, likely again at left tackle, although he did play the majority of the snaps last year for the Cougars at right tackle. So it'll be interesting to see his adjustment, but he's likely the top newcomer for the Bruins this year. Then switching over to the defense, this was the strength of the Bruins last year. They ranked fairly well on the offensive side of the ball, but they had the number 2 rush defense in all of college football last year. They were 10th in scoring, or 10th in total, and 14th in scoring. So this defense was really a top 20 unit. They struggled a little bit more against the pass, but Pac-12 is very dependent on the pass, so that can be expected. Kind of leading on the front edge is going to be defensive tackle Jay Tola and defensive end Jacob Buzik coming in from Navy. He missed most of last season after suffering a torn pec, but he comes in with 6 sacks and 8 tackles for loss in the 2022 season. The main objective, though, for the Bruins this year is going to be replacing edge rusher outside linebacker Laiatu Latu, who helped lead the Bruins to a unit that ranked 3rd in tackles for loss and 6th in sacks, both of those nationally. He was a first-round draft pick, I think top half of the first round, and so that'll be a huge adjustment. A guy who they're going to depend on is an inside linebacker, Oluwafemi Oladejo, who will be moving likely from inside to edge rusher and outside linebacker position. That was something that the Bruins explored during the spring. Joining Oladejo in the linebacker core is going to be Kane Medrano, who is the team high returner in tackles with 56 last year. So of the guys coming back, he had the most for this defense. And then Jalen Davies leads a young cornerback unit, and in the back half of the defense, in the secondary, the safeties, a bunch of transfers coming in: Ramon Henderson from Notre Dame, Brian Addison from Oregon, and KJ Wallace. I believe maybe KJ Wallace is a returning Bruin, but their schedule is manageable outside of a very difficult 3-game stretch early on in the season. Their first couple games at Hawaii, home against Indiana, they should be 2-0 after those, but then their slate is at LSU, home against Oregon, and at Penn State, September 21st, 28th, and October 5th. 3 straight weeks, 2 of those games, literally in probably 2 of the top 5 most difficult environments in college football, and then, might as well have Oregon at home. So if they're anything better than 2-3 after those first 5 games, I would be shocked. But they shouldn't be worse than 2-3. They should win those first 2 games. After that, their schedule's a little more manageable. I think adjusting to the Big Ten, I would expect the Bruins to probably drop off a little bit from their 8 wins last year and probably finish with 6. That's my expectations for the Bruins. Moving right along, the team that's projected really right in the middle of the conference is Washington. I think there's a lot of questions for this team, rightfully so. They're last year's runner-up nationally, losing the championship game to Michigan. They were 14-1, 9-0, Pac-12 champions, but they're only bringing back 3 starters. They're one guy on defense, who I'll talk about in a minute here, and then their kicker and punter. The main reason for that, of course, is Kalen DeBoer making the move to Alabama. Coming in is Jed Fish from Oregon. I've talked about these Huskies a little bit, but I want to really allow space in this video to go in depth about them. They're bringing in Will Rogers, who is probably the team's top newcomer at quarterback from Mississippi State. He was very productive for the Bulldogs. They might not have won a lot in a very tough SEC, but they certainly competed, and I think either last year or 2 years ago had one of the top passing offenses in college football. They're also going to depend on their ground game. Fish brings in Jonah Coleman from Arizona. He had 1,100 yards from scrimmage last year, a little over 800 rushing, and about 250, I think, receiving, and then Cameron Davis as well. Wide receivers, Denzel Boston, who was a backup to Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk, those guys. He's going to be stepping up in kind of more of that wide receiver 1 role. And then Jeremiah Hunter comes in from Cal. He has totaled 144 receptions for over 2,000 yards and 13 touchdowns in his career with the Golden Bears, so I think that is a good addition as well. Then shifting gears over to the defense. Again, like offense, this is a lot about who's coming in. There's a couple of guys who are coming back. Linebacker Alfonso Tuputala is the lone starter throughout the season with regular experience start. And then they have a couple other guys. Linebacker Carson Bruner, who's kind of a homegrown guy, I believe. He started as a walk-on and has since grown into his role. Bruner is the one who's the 3rd leading tackler off the bench. Tuputala is a linebacker with a lot of experience as a starter. And then safety Cameron Fabiculan is a part-time starter. Defensive coordinator Steve Belichick, yes, that Belichick, Bill Belichick's son, will be taking over as the defensive coordinator along with Fish. Some of his guys that are going to be guys to look out for. The defense has a little bit more, I would say, of that returning production. Defensive end Zach Durfee comes in, cornerback Ephesians Prysock, and then the Sugar Bowl hero Elijah Jackson. If you remember correctly, he's the one who batted the ball away when Texas was going for, I forget now if it was the go-ahead or the tying touchdown, but either way, it was a play that saved the Sugar Bowl, won it for the Huskies, and sent them to the national championship game. Their schedule is pretty tough. It's, the Big Ten is very deep. It's rich now with really good teams. They've got a home game against Michigan, followed by a road game against Iowa, October 5th and 12th. Those are 2 tough back-to-back games. The Wolverines are going to be really tough to beat. I'll talk about them more in my conference championship title contenders video coming later this week or early next. And then Iowa. Kinnick Stadium is always a tough place to go into, especially if that game is a night game. That'll be a tough one to go into the Hawks' Nest. And then kind of to wrap up the season, they have home games against USC and UCLA, and road games against Penn State and Oregon. I think this Washington team is going to be better than a lot of people expect, but I think this slate of 6 games, I would be surprised if they go better than 2-4 in that stretch. So I think maybe 9-3 is the ceiling, but more likely it's an 8-4 and probably finishing maybe, I would say 7-5 or 8-4 is where I would put Washington at right now. Then moving right along into USC, the Trojans are projected to finish around 5th in the conference, depending on where you're looking. They were 8-5, 5-4 in the Pac-12 last year. 11 starters coming back, 5 offense, 4 defense, kicker and punter. They got off to a hot 6-0 start, and with the reigning Heisman Trophy winner Caleb Williams, it looked like they were heading for the college football playoff and potentially even higher than that. Then they go on a 1-5 stretch. I had misspoke in a previous video. They didn't finish 7-6, but they finished 7-5 in the regular season, and then they got a really good Holiday Bowl win over Louisville, the ACC runners-up. So obviously gone is the aforementioned Caleb Williams, and coming in is Miller Moss, who had a huge 6-touchdown performance against the Cardinals. It's one game. We've seen it with Nico Imaleva from Tennessee, and I think Avery Johnson from Kansas State, that can create a lot of hype. But I don't think Miller Moss has the job secured quite as well as those 2 other guys, because he's going to be challenged by UNLV transfer Jaden Maeva. So that'll be something to watch as we get into fall camp coming up here really soon, if it hasn't started already, because we are at the beginning of August. So as I record this video on July 31st, we're a month away actually from kickoff of week 1, obviously week 0 a week before. So it's getting into crunch time. We're going to start figuring out where these teams are going with their starting quarterbacks, the teams that are having battles. This is one to keep an eye on. Another replacement is Woody Marks at running back. He comes in from Mississippi State, replacing Marshawn Lloyd. And then wide receivers, Zachariah Branch and Jacoby Lane are the 2 guys to look out for to step up for the Trojans' passing attack and be viable options for whichever quarterback wins the job. Offensive line is going to have to step up. I think that was one of the things they struggled with last year, was protecting Caleb Williams, and that caused a lot of issues in that kind of collapse down the back stretch of the season. Offensively, they were really high ranking, and I think that should continue with Lincoln Riley at the helm. Number 3 in scoring, 5 in passing, 10 in total. Then looking at defense, though, it was the polar opposite. They were 101st or worse in every key statistical area of that: scoring, rush, pass, and total defense. They're going to have to totally, I guess maybe start from scratch. I don't know if that'll look like a formation realignment or just some changes, but some of the key guys to watch. They're bringing in a couple of Oregon State transfers, which the Beavers lost a lot, obviously, with Jonathan Smith going to Michigan State. Linebacker Easton Mascarenas Arnold and safety Achille Arnold, a couple of Arnolds. And then Kamari Ramsey is another safety coming in from UCLA. They also bring in a transfer cornerback, DeCarlos Nicholson from Mississippi State, and a true freshman quarterback who impressed in the spring, Marcellus Williams. And then the 2 guys who are kind of the returning guard, so to speak, are linebacker Eric Gentry, and then a guy who's been hyped up a lot, transferred in from Georgia, Bear Alexander at defensive tackle. So those are the names. I think the big question is not so much who is on this defense, but who will step up. If it's these transfers coming in, if it's a change in the strategy of defense, whatever that might look like, this team is really going to have to step up if the Trojans hope to compete in the Big Ten, because a lot of teams are going to have good defenses. Their offense is probably going to be able to keep up, but if they can't stop any of the opposing offenses, they're going to be in trouble. I think, unlike some of the other conference changes, I think they'll benefit from, honestly, a conference that outside of the teams like Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State aren't world beaters on offense, or a team like Michigan running the ball. I think USC will find it a little bit easier to slow down opposing offenses, but it's kind of yet to be seen because they haven't proven that yet. Their schedule, for a team of their caliber and as high as they're expected to finish, is fairly manageable. They get LSU in Las Vegas to open the season. Geographically, home field advantage, but LSU fans always travel very well, so I assume I anticipate it'll really feel like a true neutral site game. That's a big game early on. I think both of these 2 teams, it was the same thing last year, that we expected both teams to compete in a 4-team playoff. I think it's reasonable to assume that both will be competing for a spot in the 12-team playoff. So that game, I think, though, will probably determine which team of those is competing by the end of the season. After that, they're at Michigan, home against Penn State, at Washington and home against Notre Dame. Those are kind of their toughest games. I think hosting the Nittany Lions and the Fighting Irish is important, even though the Coliseum isn't a fortress. At least it hasn't been recently. I think they will benefit from those. USC, I think they're right around that 8-4, 9-3 range. I think their defense is going to cost them a few games, but I think they're still among the most talented teams in the Big Ten Conference, and that's why they're expected to finish top 5. Finally, the Oregon Ducks, I'm going to breeze through them because I'm going to save them for the conference contenders video because they are the team, I think, that could be either with or second to Ohio State, the favorite in this conference. They were 12-2 last year, 8-1 in conference. Their offense was number 1 in passing and second in both scoring and total. They had a plus 11 turnover margin, and defensively they ranked 9th in scoring, 10th in rush, and 22nd in total defense. The key names to watch, again, I'm just going to kind of list these names off here and then kind of, wrap this video up. Dylan Gabriel at quarterback coming in from Oklahoma, Jordan James at running back, wide receivers Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart, and then tight end Terrence Ferguson, and then on the defensive side of the ball, defensive lineman Jordan Branch, linebacker Jeffrey Bassa, and then cornerback Jabbar Muhammad coming in from Washington. This Ducks team, led by Dan Lanning at head coach, I think is a preeminent contender in college football to win the national championship this year. I would even go so far as to say that I think they could be the favorite, and I think the fact that they have a high-powered, high-flying offense paired with one of the top defenses, maybe a little bit underrated in the country, is something to watch out for. So Oregon, again, I'll save going into them a little bit more in depth for the next video, but I think they will be the team that makes the smoothest transition to the Big Ten because they kind of fit that mold of, having a good offense, being able to pass the ball like in Ohio State or move it like Michigan does on the ground, and have a very stout defense, even in a conference that is notorious for putting up points, that what the Pac-12 was. So that's all for this video. Let me know your thoughts on how you think the newbies to the Big Ten are going to fare this season, what that'll look like. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burtnett, signing out. Peace.